So, if they ever do a Warlords of Draenor Classic and then do a Season of Discovery for Warlords of Draenor Classic, would that be called WAD SOD or SOD WAD? What's up, everybody, and welcome back to Sounds Good Makes Sense, a discussion show for the World of Warcraft player. My name is Devilor, and yeah, we're going through those roadmaps today. If you're unfamiliar, Blizzard released two roadmaps for World of Warcraft planned in 2024, one for Classic and one for the modern game. And there's a whole heap of interesting stuff in there, not just in terms of little surprises that they've left behind, stuff that maybe we weren't expecting to see or just have no idea what it is in the first place. But also there's some interesting things about the ways that they've phrased certain bullet points on the list and just how they've presented some of the information that's here that I think is worth digging into as well. I'm also taking a slightly different approach to how I produce this episode. Instead of writing out a full script for myself and trying to remember what the words that I wrote down were, I've just got the roadmaps in front of me. I've got a list of notes that I want to make sure that I get to as I go through those roadmap images, and we're just gonna wing it and see how it goes. That's actually a bit more similar to how I used to do the Weekly Marmot back in the day, but I also used to ramble in circles a lot in the Weekly Marmot back in the day. So let me know how this feels, if this episode feels a little bit more natural to you, or if I should go back to writing out all of my words because I'm a big dummy who can't remember what I'm trying to say. Okay, let's get started. I'm going to start off with the classic roadmap for a couple of reasons. One is mostly that's what I've been covering lately, so I want to start off with the stuff that I have the most direct and recent experience with. But also, there's a couple things in the classic roadmap that we're going to refer back to when we go through the modern roadmap. So starting straight out of the gate, we have the Ruby Sanctum raid coming up for Wrath of the Lich King Classic in winter 2024. Now, if you're like me, you probably need a reminder that winter, the season, doesn't officially start until like the last week and a half of the year. So when they say winter in this roadmap, they're referring to January, February, and parts of March. So the first like quarter of the year. Also in winter 2024, we have confirmation that that is the timeline for the next phase of Season of Discovery. We've been kind of expecting a January release for phase 2 of Season of Discovery. This is interesting because they put it after the Ruby Sanctum raid. So it's possible they either put those both within the span of like a couple of weeks of each other, or it's possible that we're actually looking to February for phase 2 of Season of Discovery, which would be super interesting. As far as what they have listed for phase 2 Season of Discovery, there's nothing really surprising here. Level 40, we already knew that. New runes, we already knew that. New PvP event, we already knew that they were doing something in Stranglethorn, which we talked about a little bit last week. And then the Gnomeregan raid, which again, we knew already. And I'm not going to go through every single bullet point throughout the rest of these roadmaps if it's stuff that we already knew. But yeah, for phase 2, no surprises. The fact that there are no surprises, I think, was notable enough to mention. We can also see squeezing in there in between Season of Discovery phase 2 and also Classic Hardcore update. That's when they're planning the Cataclysm Classic beta. So that'll be landing. They've got it kind of right on the edge of winter and spring, which to me means like a late March, early April timeframe for that, which will make sense as we go through the rest of this in terms of how that timing works out. But the Cata beta right around then as well. That'll be interesting just in terms of coverage, because it seems like we're going to have a lot of things to actually keep track of during that time period. Moving on to the Classic Hardcore update. They announced at BlizzCon that Self-Found mode is coming to Classic Hardcore. And they have that now releasing right at the start of spring, maybe the tail end of winter, but probably right around the start of spring for 2024, which puts it as an April, maybe May timeframe. But I would guess April for this. And self-found mode, if you're unfamiliar with the terminology, because it comes largely from ARPG backgrounds. Self-found mode means more or less that you are only able to use items or equipment or anything along those lines that you have acquired yourself. So on a basic level, what that means we can expect for self-found mode is probably just that they've disabled the auction house and the trade UI entirely. Like literally you cannot trade and you cannot use the auction house if you're playing under self-found mode. Now, what's interesting to think about here, though, is what does this mean for things like professions, for example? If there's no auction house and there's no way to trade with other players, I mean, WoW's professions are built, especially in Classic, are built in such a way that you quite regularly need things from other professions to craft the stuff that you're wanting to get. And if you can't go to the auction house and you can't trade with another player, like if you're an engineer, for example, trying to make your engineering goggles, but you need leather for those, how are you going to get that leather? Is the intention that you go skinning and engineering, because then you don't have mining to be able to get all of the like ore and stuff that you're going to need for all of that? Is the intention that you will then need to basically drop and regain gathering professions constantly? Or my personal, what I would like to see as a fix for this, just let people have all the gathering professions. Let me have mining and skinning and herbalism so that I can at least gather this stuff in the process. I don't know. There's some interesting ways that could be accomplished. I think in the past, historically, for these sorts of like community run events, it's usually just been, yeah, professions are kind of not a thing. Or there's been like specific allowances made for certain items. I don't know. We'll see how that goes. I also want to call out that this says self-found mode. It does not say solo self-found, which is a sort of an extension of the self-found ideal. Solo self-found typically just means that you are not allowed to do anything with any other player at all ever. And that's a difficult concept to have in a game like World of Warcraft. Like if you go into a cave full of Yetis, and this is on hardcore again, I'll remind you, and there's 12 other people in there who are also killing Yetis, so you don't really ever have to worry about things respawning on top of you. Is that really solo? I would say no. But also there's no real way to avoid that in World of Warcraft. They're not going to put you in a world where you are literally the only person. I mean, maybe they will, but I think that'd be crazy, where you're literally the only person that you see out there. So the fact that they say self-found mode and not solo self-found mode to me indicates that group content will still be accessible. It will probably just be the case that you can only use the drops that you win, and they'll probably keep similar restrictions on dungeons to how they have them in hardcore. That also calls into question, like, what happens at level 60? Do you continue to have these self-found restrictions at level 60, or is it the sort of situation where you level up to 60, and then once you reach 60, the self-found restriction lifts? Congratulations, you did it. You completed self-found mode. Now you're still hardcore, but you're able to engage in group activities much more regularly. This would also be a semi-solve for the profession issue, because then at the very least, professions still have some use. That's just not until level 60. I could continue theorizing about what self-found mode in classic hardcore is going to mean for a while, and I probably will in a future episode, almost certainly. But we're going to move on. The next thing along the list is Season of Discovery Phase 3. And what they have listed here isn't surprising, but it is a little bit cheeky. They're still keeping it very close to their chest what they're actually doing as far as the raid goes in Phase 3 of Season of Discovery. We have level 50, new runes, and new raid. Doesn't say what that raid is, just that there is a new raid. Hello. Are you here to help? Now, I did have a bunch of thoughts about what they could be doing, especially when it comes to Scarlet Monastery. That was in the last episode of Sounds Good Makes Sense. So definitely recommend going back and giving that a look if you're curious. And moving on from there, we have in late spring the Cataclysm Classic pre-patch, which includes things like the pre-patch event, obviously, the addition of Worgen and Goblins, the guild features, things like transmog, account-wide collections, so on. All of those sorts of features that we expected with Cataclysm. Now, I'll remind you at this point that they're not spinning up a new set of servers for this. Cataclysm Classic is a continuation of Wrath of the Lich King Classic. And looking at this roadmap, I understand why they're doing that. Like between Wrath/Cataclassic and also Season of Discovery and also Classic Hardcore and also just continuing general support for Classic Era and I assume TBC Classic through all of this, the Classic team is kind of running 5 MMOs at once, and that's a lot. Like, this actually makes me wonder if we should expect for TBC Classic and maybe even Classic Era to go away at some point. I don't think they'll do that just because, my God, I can already smell the pitchforks, but you never know. There's a lot on the Classic team's plate. They are staffing up. There's been a lot of hiring going on for that team, but there's a lot here. As for the actual release of Cataclysm Classic, they have that listed as the start of their sort of summer section here. But it is like, it's a graphic. I don't think we should read too much into exactly where things are positioned on this, especially for larger things like releases. But that does still line up with about what we're expecting, like a July, August timeframe for Cataclysm Classic. This section also lists 4 raids, which threw me off a little bit at first, and then I remembered that Barad Hold existed. So I'm pretty sure this is Blackwing Descent, Bastion of Twilight, Throne of the Four Winds, which I always get confused with the Temple of Three Winds from Anarchy Online, but that's a completely different game. And then Barad Hold, the one that only opens when Tol Barad is owned by your faction. I believe those are the 4 raids that they're referring to. And then I had to do a little bit of digging just to remember what they meant by 7 dungeons and 2 heroic dungeons. I believe that's referring to the 2 heroic dungeons is referring to the revamped Dead Mines and Shadowfang Keep that came with the release of Cataclysm. And then the other 7 dungeons are just the 7 Cataclysm specific dungeons. There are heroic versions of those as well, which I'm pretty sure were available from the launch of Cataclysm back in the day. But I don't remember. It's been a while. I've slept since then. They've also listed the PvP battleground, which isn't a surprise at all. But it does make me remember that Strand of the Ancients was fairly controversial as a battleground. There were a lot of people like myself. I really enjoyed Strand of the Ancients. There were a lot of people who super hated Strand. And it went through a ton of revisions over the years as well. There are a lot of different versions of Strand of the Ancients that they could actually pull from. And keeping in mind that they have this like some changes mentality for Cataclysm Classic, I'm actually curious what version of Strand of the Ancients we're actually going to get. Next up on the Classic roadmap is Phase 4 of Season of Discovery. That is level 60. We're also getting new runes again at level 60. Again, I think we were kind of expecting that, but it's good to see it confirmed. But what's really interesting about this one is it just says end game activities. Like even in Phase 3, where they didn't confirm what the raid is, they did at least say there's a new raid at level 50. At level 60, it just says end game activities. And I thought about that for a minute, and it made me actually start to wonder, like, does level 60, does Phase 4 actually need more raids? Like the classic experience reaching level 60, all of a sudden there's a ton of group content for you to do. Aside from the dungeons like, Dire Maul, BRD, and so on, LBRS, there are a lot of things that are considered raids still. Ubers is considered a raid. Strathholm and Scholomance can be done with 10 players. And in fact, back when I was playing the original game, pretty much everyone did them with 10 players back then. Exception being live side strat. Most people just did that with 5, but you could still do it with 10 if you wanted to. And that's ignoring the actual raid content like Molten Core, Blackwing Lair, etc. All of that becomes available at level 60 as well. So as I was sitting and thinking about this, I started to wonder, when they say endgame activities, do they mean that they're adding just new solo stuff? Are they adding stuff that is non-group content to sort of flesh out the level 60 endgame? I don't know. It's interesting to think about, especially in the perspective of we know there's been a tease for something that is happening in the Karazhan Crypts. Now, I had assumed that was going to be a Karazhan Crypts raid, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's some sort of story thing that takes place where you're digging around through the Karazhan Crypts and it's a quest line or something along those lines. This also makes me think, and something I've seen a lot of people suggesting, maybe they'll reduce the number of players required for those level 60 raids like Molten Core and so on. Maybe 40 players for Season of Discovery is just asking a lot. And I'll be honest, it is asking a lot, especially because you've been mostly just doing 10-player raids throughout the leveling process. So maybe could be something that Blizzard considers, dropping Molten Core, etc., down to 20 players. I know some of those later raids especially are going to need a lot of work to actually make them compatible with a 20-player group size. Like imagining things like 4 Horsemen with only 20 players. Blizzard actually had to do some pretty significant changes in Wrath of the Lich King to make that adjustment. But at the same time, they have those Wrath of the Lich King versions available to pull from, so maybe it is feasible. Moving on through the rest of the 2024 roadmap for Classic, we've got 2 Cataclysm updates that are not very surprising. Rise of the Zandalari, that was when they redid Zulaman and Zul'Gurub to be 5-player dungeons. And then Rage of the Firelands, that is the release of Firelands, obviously, so that's not really surprising. What was surprising for this is the final note on the roadmap, which is another Season of Discovery update. Now, this one just says endgame content updates, which at this point could mean literally anything. We have no idea whatsoever, no hints, no clues, nothing to really look at that can indicate what this is. But what's very, very interesting about it, even in that state, is that it's there at all, we haven't gotten really much of any information as of yet as to how they're going to support Season of Discovery past Phase 4 when level 60 unlocks. So this seems to indicate they're going to keep it going, which opens up all sorts of other interesting ideas and possibilities. Like, this is right at the end of the year for them, which then means that Season of Discovery lasts into 2025 as well. And at what point is it no longer really a season, right? Like, at what point do they look at this thing and go, this is just World of Warcraft Classic Discovery or something? This is literally just Classic Plus now. And just decide, yeah, the season thing, we're just going to keep doing it. Like, if it goes on for over a year, is it really a season? I would argue not really. That name doesn't really fit anymore. So if they drop the season idea from Season of Discovery because it's just something they're going to keep on supporting, what does that mean for the rest of Classic? What does that mean for other seasonal ideas for Classic? Are they going to stop doing seasons? Are they going to spin up new seasons but keep Season of Discovery going alongside them? There's a whole bunch of different ways this could go, all of which is fascinating. I will almost certainly dig into that in a future video. But that brings us to the end of the Classic roadmap for 2024, which means it's time to move on to the Modern roadmap for 2024. And before I start digging into this one, I want to remind everyone, I'm just getting back into WoW heavily, and I have been almost exclusively on Classic in that amount of time. So it is possible that there are things in here that I'm just missing because I'm lacking information from Dragonflight that makes it make sense, or sound good for that matter. So for this episode, I'm going to give y'all a pass. If I'm about to say, if what I go through right now, I say something absolutely stupid because I'm just missing some bit of information from Dragonflight because I haven't caught up on it yet, I am giving you a pass. Feel free to call me an idiot in the comments and let me know that there is something very dumb about what I have just said. So starting off the year in 2024, we have Seeds of Renewal update, patch 10.2.5. This is sort of starting to wrap up the Dragon Isles storyline. And that's actually their first bullet, Dragon Isles epilogues. They're going to start to wrap up the Dragon Isles storyline. There's also things in there like the Reclamation of Gilneas. There's features that people are excited about, like follower dungeons, which we've seen tested on the PTR. Azerothian Archives, which we've seen tested on the PTR. There's a bunch of stuff going on here. But what's really interesting about this bullet is this little flag right next to it. What's that, Blizzard? What you doing there? Positioned directly after 10.2.5, we have this 10.2.6, which is literally just a pirate flag. Now, I could speculate for hours about what that could possibly be, because there's a lot of different directions that could go. But looking at what's coming around it, okay, we just had the Reclamation of Gilneas. Gilneas with a pirate attachment to it, like it is kind of a port city. It's along a coast. I could see something that results from the Reclamation of Gilneas leading into something pirate themed. I could also see this as maybe returning to Kultiris in some capacity, or everything that was going on with all that stuff in Battle for Azeroth. There's a lot of different directions I could go. Maybe it's both. Maybe it's Gilneas and Kultiris teaming up to piracy or something. I don't know. Lots of stuff to speculate about there. Lots of guesses to make as to what that could be. But one thing that we know for a fact now that is very interesting is there's a 10.2.5 and a 10.2.6. And then even later in this thing, there's a 10.2.7 also, which means we have 3 more content patches coming before the War Within pre-patch. And in fact, right on top of this little 10.2.6 pirate flag, right nudge between it and Season 4 of Dragonflight, is the War Within Alpha. So we will have the War Within Alpha hitting during this timeline. We're likely to learn a lot just from first looks at the War Within Alpha, what's going to come after that, which is also probably why they're trying to squeeze this 10.2.6 thing in before that lands. I just hope it's not like there's a pirate themed outfit that appears on the shop or something. I don't even have a problem with the shop. It's just there's so much hype and speculation about what this flag could be right now. It'd be a bit of a letdown if it's just like, and here's a new thing that you can go buy. Moving on, in the spring, we have Season 4 of Dragonflight. Not really a surprise to anything here. They listed as Dragonflight Raids Revisited. That's, I'm assuming, just basically faded raids. New PvP season, new Mythic Plus season. That's, again, just kind of table stakes for a Season 4. They also say new open world rewards, and that one's interesting to me just because, is it just an item level bump? What's going on here? Like, what you would normally expect for a new season is that world quests, you just get better rewards for world quests and other similar world-based content. The rewards just increase in item level. This says new. And I think it would be a little bit cheeky for Blizzard to present an increased item level on pre-existing items as quote unquote new. So maybe there's something more going on here. Maybe there's some new open world stuff that's going to occur, or entirely new things being added to existing systems. I'm not sure. Towards the end of spring, we have 10.2.7 called Dark Heart. And there's several interesting things in there. There's something they're calling Harbinger quests, which I assume is sort of a lead up to the War Within pre-patch, sort of the pre-patch to the pre-patch. Troll and Draenei Heritage armor. I'm actually really hopeful. I'm really excited to see what the Troll armor ends up looking like for that. New holiday event. I've been racking my brain trying to figure out what that could be. And I've sort of more or less settled on it's probably something that doesn't have anything to do with any existing like IRL holidays. It's probably a new thing entirely. And the most interesting one in that is actually the first bullet, this little thing called time running Pandemonium. Now, the word time running immediately brings two different words to mind, one being time walking, the other being speed running. I assume this is some sort of like time walking, speed running thing, like the older concept of challenge modes brought back in a time walking sense. And then the word pandemonium, which has been confirmed by Holly Longdale, that is not a typo. It is meant to be Panda. So that makes me think what we're probably getting here as time running Pandemonium is almost certainly some kind of, like I say, challenge mode, speed running thing built around Mists of Pandaria time walking. There's also been some data mining that has turned up some items called like speedrunners blank. So there's a lot to suggest that this is some sort of speedrunning thing. The big question I have, if they're bringing back like the concept of challenge modes where the goal was complete this instance as quickly as possible, and the faster you go, the better, and there's like ladders and stuff for it, does that also mean there's a possibility of them bringing back the old challenge mode rewards? There's a lot of very cool cosmetic items that are not available anymore because their whole intention was you need to be able to complete this inside the confines of what the game was like at the time. Which is very difficult to, like, you can't really do that with everybody leveling up a bunch and getting way better gear and everyone's damage numbers increasing and everything, and then squishes happen and all this other stuff occurs. But Blizzard has a lot more tools under their belt for bringing things back to an earlier state these days. I don't know. It could be interesting to see if they decide to allow that. Then we have the War Within beta right on the edge of spring and summer. And then the War Within pre-patch landing at early summer. This includes everything that we're really expecting. It's got war bands in there. It's got dynamic flight in there. It's got the guild updates, which I'm pretty sure is just referring to the cross-faction guilds coming in. And it's got world events as well. But what stuck out to me about this one is it's listed right at early summer. You know what else is listed right at early summer? Cataclysm Classic release. And Blizzard has had kind of a bad habit in the past of doing a big classic release and then immediately following that up with a big modern release as well. So people come back to classic for like a day and then go back to the modern game. Now, to some degree, this is a little bit unavoidable just when you look at how packed both of these roadmaps are. There's going to be releases that are next to other releases. That's unavoidable. But it is still a little bit awkward that they're sort of lining things up in a way where their biggest release for the modern roadmap and their biggest release for the classic roadmap are kind of landing at about the same time. The nature of development timelines being what they are, it again may just be completely unavoidable, but it's not really ideal if that ends up being the case. Of course, the actual release of the War Within isn't with pre-patches. They've got it listed here as late summer, early autumn. Not quite sure exactly where that's going to fall. I doubt there's going to be a 3-month gap between the pre-patch and the actual release. So I'm assuming this means they've got summer and autumn here listed in kind of vague terms, but that will be the release of the War Within, which has all the content coming with it that we're expecting. There's the new zones, there's the Earth and Allied race, there's hero talents, there's new dungeons, new raid, new PvP season. It's all there. Of course, there is a final note on here as well for the 11.0.5 War Within content update. They haven't given a patch name for it yet, like they did with Seeds of Renewal and Dark Heart. But it has the bullets that you would expect for a .5 patch, story and quest, new content and system updates. This also, they've included the 20th anniversary event as part of this segment, which really means that if we know that content update needs to come out by November, right? Because that's when the actual 20th anniversary is going to be, which means that the War Within release and the War Within pre-patch could happen anywhere between July and October, which is a pretty wide gap. So there is a lot of room for them to play around there with release timelines. We'll see where it ends up landing. Hopefully we can start to understand more once we see the actual dates for like alpha and beta actually releasing. Overall, there is a lot to think about with these roadmaps, and I'm sure we will be referring back to these images quite regularly over the next year. There's just a lot of speculation that can be done, and you know me, I love to speculate about literally everything I can. But that's going to go ahead and do it for today. Let's go ahead and wrap it up with some questions. We had a couple from the last video that I'd really love to talk about. First one comes from Movie Endose del Fuego. I hope I said that correctly. Who says, love to see you back on YouTube. Thank you very much. Do you think that things like Lock Tank or Mage Healer could be translated in some way to retail? And absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a really, really interesting idea to explore, especially in the context of the new hero talents coming in the War Within. So far, they've kind of been relatively, like, they're mostly passive stuff that adds like maybe one new ability or just changes how an ability works, but they're mostly passive. But so are most of the runes. So are most of the mage, well, not the mage healer stuff adds new abilities, but there's a lot of ways that I think they could incorporate some of these ideas into those hero talents in the future. The real question is that actually even what they want to do with hero talents, or are hero talents meant to be just some kind of side thing that it's a few extra perks that don't really have too much impact, and there's shared between spell. Like it is a different thing in a lot of senses, but still, I could see that being an avenue for stuff like that to be included. And I'm always in favor of bringing more roles to classes that don't have the ability to spec into anything else. The next question comes from Spa Monkey, who says, I would love to hear your take on current balance between specs and if you think they should do a tuning pass on talents or simply use talents from a different era like Wrath. For example, Affliction Locks have improved Curse of Agony for 3 talent points to only increase the dot by 6%, which ends up mapping out to something along the lines of 0.8 damage per tick. So the first thing I'll note, outside of maybe PvP, damage per tick is not really a good metric to look at for stuff like this. What's more important is damage per cast time. So if you add all of that together, the 0.8 damage per tick, you add all that together over the course of the literally 1.5 seconds, because it's just the GCD that you've cast on Curse of Agony, it actually just think of it as a 6% increase to Curse of Agony damage. Look at how much Curse of Agony equates to your overall damage output and determine if doing 6% more of that would be valuable to you. I don't know enough about how Warlocks are currently playing in Season of Discovery to say whether that's worth it or not. Just noting that damage per tick is not really the metric to look at here, because you're only spending 1.5 seconds to gain all of that damage. As far as balance between specs go, and specifically how that relates to talents, I would like them to touch talents as little as possible in Season of Discovery. It's not just as simple as pulling talents from a different era, because you can't pull in what is a 51 point talent tree and just knock off the bottom 21 points of that. That doesn't, or the bottom 20 points of that. It doesn't work that way. You would have to be able to balance that out against everything that's missing in that sense. And also, like, a lot of the feel of Classic comes from the talents being in the kind of bonkers way that they were. Like Druid, for example, there's almost nothing for a Resto Druid to spend their talent points on at level 25 right now, because everything is actually kind of a feral talent. But that's because in Classic, Druids were meant to be shifting around, going through their different forms constantly. You weren't meant to like hardcore dedicate yourself to, I am a healer and only ever a healer and I never do anything but heal. You're meant to be weaving other things in. And they've been able to accomplish some of that with the way runes work. For example, again, looking at Resto Druid, the Wrath rune allows them to just spam Wraths in the meantime and get a little bit of healing benefit from it, but they're doing that hybridized damage and healing. And so I think, with the exception of if there's a case where a rune comes out and the rune is great, there's just this one talent that makes it extremely broken, that's about the only state that I would consider wanting them to actually touch any of the talents. I don't think perfect balance is in any way something that should be a goal for Season of Discovery. And that's not to say don't balance things, just that going to the extent of doing a full pass across all talents and doing tuning on everything, I don't think that's worth their time. I would much rather see them address things through runes and the new stuff that they're adding than by going back to stuff that existed in Classic and doing class changes in that regard. Anyway, that'll wrap us up for today. Thank you all so much for watching. We'll be back again next week. Let me know if you have any other questions that you'd like to see answered, or if there's any topics that you'd like me to hit. I have a list that I've been building, but there's so much to talk about. I want to know what you guys think is most important to see my thoughts on. And let me know how you felt about the more unscripted nature of this episode. I definitely feel like I was doing a little bit of rambling here and there, but hopefully it still worked out well. Let me know if you prefer this or if I should go back to writing out my stupid idiot words so that I remember what I'm saying. And of course, if you're not already subscribed, please do hit the button, hit the like as well if you can, leave comments, engage, praise the algorithm. Social media, pretty much everywhere. DEVOLORE, Devilore. You can find me on everything. I've been streaming a lot on Twitch. I've also been streaming a lot here on YouTube, so check those out. Anyway, I'm going to stop rambling now. Thank you all so much once again, and I will see you next week.